I had been married for over 30 years, and all that time, I thought the problem was me. That's how people start to lose themselves. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't begin with yelling or hitting. Sometimes it starts with silence, with a look of disapproval that lingers just a little too long, and before you know it, you've forgotten who you were. My name is Martha Louise Bennett. I'm 78 years old today. I've lived through a lot in my life, but this story burned me up from the inside like few others have. And as painful as it is to go back to it, I know someone out there needs to hear this. Because sometimes all we need is to hear a voice saying, "You're not crazy. You're not alone." I lived in Shelbyville, a small town in rural Tennessee. Wooden porches, church bells ringing at noon, the smell of apple pie drifting out, of kitchen windows. It seemed like a peaceful place. And it was. Too peaceful. Peaceful like a locked room where no one can hear you scream. I met Richard when I was 22. He was handsome, polite, and had that southern charm that makes you believe you're safe. We got married after 2 years together. In the beginning, he made me laugh. He brought me wildflowers, left me little notes. Everything seemed perfect. But right after we moved into our first house, everything changed. There were no punches. Never punches. What he did was more subtle. He'd tell me my hair looked bad, that my cooking was too salty, that I talked too loud, that I laughed like a fool. He'd say it all with that cold smile, like he was doing me a favor. "It's for your own good, Martha," he'd say. "You need to improve." And I believed him. I spent years trying to be the perfect wife. I kept the house clean, made his favorite meals, wore the clothes he liked, smiled in front of others. But inside, I was slowly fading, like a candle melting quietly, until there's almost nothing left. I carried that heaviness in my chest every single day. I woke up with it, went to sleep with it. But I kept telling myself, he's a good man. He just has a strong personality. And once again, I tried to adjust. I thought maybe one day he'd be proud of me. But nothing was ever enough, and then there was Elaine, my cousin, my mother's sister's daughter. We grew up together, played with dolls, spent summers at the lake. She was like a sister to me. So when she moved nearby with her husband and started coming over more often, I didn't suspect a thing. Not one thing. She was family. The years passed. Life moved on. I stayed by the side of a man who tore me down every single day, and a cousin who claimed to love me like a sister. They were both pillars in my life, one crooked, the other shining so bright it blinded me. But somewhere inside me, there was a voice. A quiet voice that would sometimes scream, "This isn't right, Martha. You don't deserve this." And I'd hush that voice. I'd smile at the neighbors, bring pies to church, scrub the bathroom while humming softly so no one would hear my sadness. Until one day, that voice got too loud to ignore, and that's when I found out. After 15 years. 15 years. 15 years where the woman I called my sister was sleeping with my husband, and you might think that was the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing they laughed at me. That, while I cried alone in the bathroom, feeling unwanted, they were meeting at some cheap motel off the highway. that while I cooked his favorite meal with the last bit of love I had left, he told her I was dead weight. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But what they didn't know is that the candle they tried to snuff out for so many years still had a spark left. And that spark, honey, was about to become a wildfire. If this grandma's story is touching your heart, go ahead and leave a like. It really helps the channel and shows that you want to hear more real stories like this one. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next ones. And if you know someone who might need to hear something like this, share it. Sometimes a simple story can turn a whole day around. Thank you for being here and listening. With your heart. My name is Martha Louise Bennett. I'm 78 years old now. I've seen the sun rise over 1,000 different mornings. But nothing in my life prepared me for the day I discovered the truth. I had been living with a lie curled up like a snake in my home for 15 long years. And that snake had a face. 2, actually. Richard's and Elaine's. It started with something small, a receipt. That's all it was. A thin, crumpled piece of paper that fell from Richard's wallet when I was doing laundry, like I'd done for decades. It was from a roadside motel about 20 miles outside of town. The name printed at the top brought a strange taste to my mouth, like rust or blood, or the kind of bitterness that only truth can cause. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he stopped there for a coffee. Maybe he met a client. But something inside me, something deep, buried under years of silence, said, "Look again, Martha." And I did. It was dated for a Sunday. A Sunday I remember well, because I'd been at home all day, making a quilt for our granddaughter's birthday. Richard had said he was going fishing. I even packed his cooler that morning. He kissed my cheek and told me to take it easy. But now, I saw the time on that receipt. Check-in, 2:08 p.m., check-out, 6:51 p.m. No one fishes in a motel room. My hands trembled as I folded the receipt and tucked it into my apron. My legs didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall, while the air around me grew heavier by the second. There was a hum in my ears, like the sound of 1,000 bees buzzing just behind my skull. And I knew this was the beginning of something terrible. The worst part? I didn't confront him. Not that night, not even the next. After decades of living afraid of saying the wrong thing, of making him angry or getting that disappointed smirk, I froze. I buried it, like I always did. But now I was watching. He started coming home later than usual, making excuses, leaving his phone face down. And then one evening, while we were sitting in the living room, him with a beer, me knitting in silence, his phone buzzed. He got up to use the restroom and left it on the armrest. I don't know what made me do it. My heart was pounding, so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. I picked it up and looked. The message read, "Next Tuesday, same time, same room. I miss your hands." I felt my stomach twist. The sender's name? Just a single letter. E. I knew right then. I knew. I stood up, phone still in hand, and walked straight to the bathroom door. My knuckles were white around the device. "Who is E?" I asked through the door. Silence. Then the sound of the toilet flushing, water running. He opened the door, face blank. "What are you talking about?" I showed him the message. He stared at it. Didn't even pretend to be shocked. "You went through my phone?" he said, like I was the criminal. "You're cheating on me?" I whispered. "With who?" He stared at me, and then he said her name, just like that. Elaine. The room spun. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. Something else rose up in me, something stronger than grief, stronger than betrayal. "You've been sleeping with my cousin?" I said, my voice cracking. "For a long time," he replied. "And honestly, it's been better than anything we ever had." I slapped him. I'd never hit anyone in my life, but in that moment, my hand moved. Before I could think, the sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. And for the first time in years, Richard looked afraid. He called me crazy, said I was old and jealous and pathetic, but I didn't hear it. My ears were ringing with fury, yes, but also with clarity, a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. That night I packed a bag, just one, a small leather one with my name stitched on it from when I was a girl. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I drove to my sister's house 2 counties over and slept in a room that smelled like lavender and safety. And while I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear like he wanted me to. No, I was going to burn everything down, carefully, quietly, but thoroughly. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it wears lipstick, bakes pies, and smiles like nothing's wrong. But inside, it's building something fierce. I stayed at my sister Carol's house for 3 days. She didn't ask many questions at first. Just opened the door, hugged me, and said, "Your room's ready." That was all I needed. For the first time in what felt like a century, I sat at a kitchen table where I wasn't being judged. She poured me tea, served me sweet biscuits, and let me sit there in silence as the storm inside me brewed. On the second night, I told her everything. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Elaine? Our Elaine?" I nodded, and then I cried. Not the kind of sob that comes from pain, but the kind that comes from release, like poison being drawn out of a wound. It felt good and awful at the same time. Carol was angry, not just for me, but for the years she'd sat across from Richard and Elaine at church luncheons, family birthdays, Christmases. They looked us in the eyes, Martha, all those years, like it was nothing. That was when I knew. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't disappear and let them go on living like nothing happened. Like I was just a week-old woman they could erase. No. I was going to take my life back. I returned to the house on a Friday afternoon. Richard wasn't home. I walked into the kitchen like I always had. The same worn tiles, the same little sunflower curtains. But I wasn't the same woman. I wasn't moving in shame anymore. I walked like I owned that place. Because I did. I went straight to the cabinet where we kept the family paperwork. Tax returns, mortgage documents, insurance policies. I knew that drawer like the back of my hand. I'd organized it every year. That day, I started pulling pieces, copying files, photographing them with my phone. You see, Richard wasn't just cheating on me emotionally. No, he was hiding money. Accounts I didn't know about. Withdrawals that didn't make sense. He never thought I'd look. But I did. I took it all and saved every piece of evidence. The next step was harder. Elaine. I invited her over for coffee. She walked into my kitchen. like nothing had happened. Like we were still cousins who swapped cake recipes and stories about the grandkids. She even hugged me. I almost vomited, but I smiled. I served her lemon pie and chamomile tea. "You look tired," she said, stirring the sugar with her perfect pinky finger up. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I replied. "About family, about honesty." She gave a tight-lipped smile. I watched her closely. "You know, Elaine," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I've been remembering all the summers we spent together as girls, how we used to promise we'd always be there for each other." Her eyes flickered. "Just for a second." "That was a long time ago," she said, her tone shifting. "But I still remember," I replied. "And I also remember the motel receipts, the text messages, and the look on your face right now." She froze. Her cup rattled against the saucer. "What are you talking about?" she said, but her voice had already dropped its mask. I leaned forward. "Calm. Steady. I know everything, Elaine." She went pale. Her hand flew to her throat. "Martha, listen." "No," I interrupted. "You listen. You think you broke me, you and Richard. But you didn't. You woke me up." She started to stammer, to cry. Crocodile tears, fake as her French manicure. I didn't move. "You've had 15 years to practice your lies," I said, standing up. "But you're not welcome in this house anymore. You're not family, not to me." She left in tears. Good. She could take her betrayal with her. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and watched the sun set over the hills. The air smelled like honeysuckle and fresh earth. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, power. Not the kind that comes from hurting others, but the kind that rises when you stop letting people hurt you. I called a lawyer the next morning. I told him everything. The hidden assets, the years of emotional abuse, the affair. He listened, took notes, told me I had a strong case. That alone made my heart beat louder in my chest. Divorcing Richard wouldn't be quick or easy. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been quiet for too long. And now, every word I spoke was fire. The best part? He had no idea what was coming. I wish I could tell you Richard crumbled when I served him the divorce papers, that he broke down and begged for forgiveness. But that's not what happened. When I handed him that envelope, he barely looked, surprised. He sat back in his chair, crossed his legs, and said, "Well, it's about time." That hit me harder than I expected. After all the pain, all the secrets, all the lies, he acted like it was some casual business transaction. No remorse, no shame. Just that same smug smile that used to make me feel small. But this time, I didn't shrink. This time, I met his gaze and said, "You're going to regret the way you treated me." He laughed. Laughed. "Martha, you don't have it in you. You're just an old woman clinging to pride." And that right there was the moment I knew I had him beat. Because he still thought I was the same woman who folded his laundry and cooked his meals while he snuck around with my cousin. He still thought I'd cry myself to sleep, write him letters, beg him to come back. He didn't know I'd been documenting everything, recording conversations, photographing bank statements. He didn't know I'd already spoken to 3 women in town who had stories of their own about him, women he'd manipulated, borrowed money from, made promises to. He didn't know I had years of quiet power building up inside me. and I wasn't done. The lawyer I'd hired, Nathan, was young, probably in his 30s, but sharp as a tack and respectful in a way that made me feel safe. He called me, "Ma'am," and always asked if I was comfortable before we started talking. I liked that. Together, we built a case. One that showed financial deceit, emotional neglect, and manipulation. Nathan said, "Mrs. Bennett, if the judge hears even half of this with the right framing, we'll be in a very strong position." It wasn't just about the money. It was about finally being seen, finally having someone on my side. Meanwhile, word began to spread around Shelbyville. Not because I said anything. I didn't have to. Small towns have ears. Whispers found their way into church pews, grocery aisles, and back porches. People who'd smiled at Richard for years suddenly looked the other way. Women I barely knew began stopping me after Sunday service, gently touching my arm and saying, "You're brave. We're with you." One of those women was Lillian, a widow from 2 blocks over. She brought me a pecan pie one afternoon and said, "I've been through something similar. Just never had the courage to leave." We sat on the porch for hours, talking like old friends. It reminded me of who I used to be. Kind, open, soft. Before I'd been hardened by years of silence. And slowly, something started to shift inside me. I began doing things for me. I repainted the living room in a soft blue I'd always loved, but Richard had said was too cold. I started wearing earrings again. Red lipstick. Things he'd called attention-seeking. I started gardening in the mornings, planting lavender and rosemary in the front yard so the wind would carry the scent through the house. I started dancing again. Not in public. Not yet. But alone. In the kitchen, when the radio played old swing tunes. I'd sway with a wooden spoon in my hand and remember a version of myself that hadn't been seen in decades. But I was also planning. Because you see, Richard didn't just hurt me emotionally. He humiliated me. And I knew him. I knew his weaknesses. Pride. Status. Reputation. He cared deeply about what people thought of him. About being respected in the community. About being admired by the men at the Elk Lodge and the deacons at church. He wore that fake charm like a second skin, so I started peeling it off. I never told lies. I didn't have to. I just told the truth. Quietly, to the right people. When asked, I'd say things like, "It's hard when someone betrays you for 15 years. Or, "I always thought Elaine was like a sister, but I guess even family can disappoint you." And people listened. They listened, and they started asking questions. Suddenly, Richard wasn't being invited to Sunday barbecues. His friends stopped returning his calls. The pastor didn't ask him to read scripture anymore. At the diner, folks would glance at him, whisper, then turn back to their pancakes. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was reputation rot. Slow, steady, undeniable. And every time I saw him squirm behind that forced smile, I felt a flicker of justice. Not hate, not anger, just justice. And I wasn't done yet, because the final piece of this story, the one that would turn everything around, was still coming. And it would be mine. I knew the day would come when Richard would finally realize what he'd lost, but more importantly, what he was about to lose. And I don't mean just his public image, or the neighbors' respect, or the whispers that followed him from the barbershop to the town square. I mean everything. Because, you see, after decades of being treated like a background character in my own life, I had finally stepped into the spotlight. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. Like a train rolling forward that nothing could stop. It started with the house. That house, with its peeling porch paint and creaky stairs, had been mine as much as his. I'd planted every flower in that yard, scrubbed every tile, washed every window. Yet, he acted like I was trespassing in a space he owned. The truth? My name was on that deed. And with Nathan's help, I made sure it stayed there. Richard, in his arrogance, thought I'd just walk away. He underestimated how much I'd learned over the years, not just about finances and legal forms, but about him. Every habit, every pressure point, every corner he tried to cut. And now, I was turning all of that into quiet ammunition. We had a court date scheduled, but before it came, something unexpected happened. Elaine showed up again. She came to the house, uninvited, of course, standing on the porch with sunglasses too big for her face and shame too small to see. She knocked twice, soft and hesitant, like a child trying to sneak back into a room they'd broken. I opened the door slowly. "Martha," she said, voice trembling. I didn't answer. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered. I thought it was just between me and him. I let out a bitter laugh. 15 years, Elaine. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Repeated, over and over. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't flinch. I left him, she said suddenly. He was lying to me too. I didn't know about the other women. Or the money. I stared at her. Not with hate. That had faded. What I felt now was something colder. A deep, hard understanding of who she truly was. I don't care who left who, I said. You and Richard are two sides of the same coin. And I've stopped spending that currency. She tried to hug me. I stepped back and closed the door. That moment, that quiet refusal to let her back in, gave me more peace than 100 apologies ever could. I'd always thought forgiveness was something I owed people. But now I realized, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away, from people, from pain, from the version of yourself that stayed silent too long, and walk into the version that says, enough. That same week, Nathan called me with an update. He's trying to claim hardship, he said, to avoid giving you your share of the retirement fund. I smiled. Let him try. Because what Richard didn't know was that I had a copy of a letter he wrote, years ago, asking his employer to deposit part of his checks into a hidden account under his brother's name. A little trick to avoid taxes. I'd found it stuffed in an old shoebox behind the furnace when I was packing up the winter coats. I gave it to Nathan. I don't think he saw this coming, Nathan said. I don't think he's ever seen me, I replied. And that was the truth. For years I was invisible to him, to the world. Just a nice old wife with a casserole in the oven and pain behind her smile. But now I was the one holding the pen, writing the ending to a story he thought was his to control. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming. In the middle of all this, I started volunteering at the local senior center, a few hours a week. Nothing big. But it meant everything, to me. I met women like Judith, who'd escaped an abusive marriage in her 60s and was now teaching painting to women her age. And Helen, who made soap from lavender and sold it online. We laughed, cried, told our stories over warm muffins and strong coffee. And every time I shared a little more of mine, I saw something light up in their faces. Recognition, courage, sisterhood. I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time in a very, very long time, I liked who I saw in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't weak. She was rising, and Richard? Well, Richard was still living in that empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of the lies he told, watching the world shift around him while the woman he thought he owned rewrote her life without him in it. But this story isn't about him anymore. It's about me. There's something strange and beautiful that happens when you begin to choose yourself after years of not knowing how. You don't wake up one day suddenly healed. It comes in waves, small, quiet ones at first, then bigger, louder ones that crash against the parts of you still afraid to stand tall. But eventually, you do. You stand. That's how I felt the first time I walked into the Green Bean Cafe downtown by myself. It might sound silly, but I'd never done that before. Not alone. For 38 years, Richard and I had our routines. He ordered for both of us. I smiled politely. I sipped coffee while he read the paper and made remarks about everyone in the room. But that morning was different. I parked my car right in front, took a deep breath, and walked in. Heads turned, of course. That's how small towns are. But I didn't flinch. I wore a soft yellow sweater, the one he used to say made me look washed out. I wore it proudly. My hair was curled, my earrings dangled, and my lipstick was as red as the tulips I'd planted along the driveway last spring. The girl behind the counter smiled and said, "Good morning, ma'am. What can I get started for you?" I looked her in the eye. "A black coffee and a blueberry muffin. And a seat by the window, please." She smiled bigger. "Coming right up." I sat at that little corner table and looked out over the square. People passed by. Kids on bikes. A man walking his dog. An elderly couple holding hands. I felt calm, rooted, whole. And then I saw him, Richard. He was across the street, walking alone. His posture wasn't as straight as it used to be. His shoulders looked heavier. He noticed me through the window, paused, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in decades. Doubt. He gave me a little nod, not quite a wave. I didn't return it. I just sipped my coffee, turned my face toward the sun, and let him fade into the background like a shadow dissolving at noon. That small moment, it was everything. I didn't need revenge anymore, because I'd already won. Later that week, I got a call from Nathan. "Martha," he said, "the judge ruled in our favor. You're going to receive full ownership of the house, half of the retirement savings, and he's been fined for financial misconduct." "He's furious, by the way," I laughed. "Let him be." I wasn't interested in his emotions anymore. For the first time in years, I was finally focused on mine. With the house in my name, I started fixing it up. Not just repairs, renovations. I had the kitchen repainted in white and navy, replaced the cracked tiles with soft gray stone. I turned the guest room into a reading room, filled it with plants, cozy chairs, and shelves of books I'd always wanted to read, but never had. The time. But the biggest change? The master bedroom. I donated the old bed, got rid of every single thing that held a memory of him. I replaced it all with things I loved: floral quilts, a vintage vanity, lace curtains that let the morning light spill across the floor. And every morning I'd wake up and smile, because it was mine, all mine. One Saturday afternoon, I invited the ladies from the senior center over for tea. We sat in the garden. Yes, I had one now, surrounded by lavender, mint, and daisies. We talked about everything. Lillian brought her homemade jam. Judith brought a painting of a cardinal she'd made just for me, and I told them, fully and honestly, what I'd been through. There were tears, and hugs, and laughter. Big, loud, joyful laughter that carried out over the fence and into the street. "Martha," Helen said, touching my hand gently, "you've inspired me. I didn't think I could start over at this age, but now I believe I can." That made my heart swell, because that's the thing they never tell you about pain. It's not just meant to break you. Sometimes it's meant to crack you open, so something stronger can grow. I started writing again, too. Little by little. Short stories, memories, letters to the younger version of myself, telling her she made it. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet. Maybe a book someday. Maybe just keep them in a drawer. But writing felt like breathing. Again, I had a life, a real life, and in that life there was no Richard, no Elaine. Just me, and the women who walked through fire and chose to bloom anyway. Of course, there were still hard days. Days when I remembered the sting of betrayal, the weight of silence. But they didn't crush me anymore. They passed like weather, something I could endure, because I'd already survived the storm. And somewhere deep in my soul, I knew I was never meant to disappear. I was meant to rise. I never thought I'd find peace in silence. For most of my life, silence meant fear. It meant walking on eggshells, keeping my voice down, not speaking unless spoken to. Silence was the sound between insults, the empty air after the door slammed, the heavy quiet after a cold dinner at a table where love no longer lived. But now, silence was a blessing. I started waking up before dawn, just to sit on my porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a warm mug in my hands. I'd listen to the birds beginning their songs, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant hum of a world still asleep, and I'd breathe deeply, fully. The kind of breath that fills your chest with light instead of dread. One of those mornings, as I watched the sky slowly turn from gray to gold, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who believed love was supposed to hurt a little. The one who thought staying silent was how you proved you were loyal. The one who thought that being needed was the same as being loved. I wanted to hug her. Tell her she didn't need to try so hard to be worthy. That she already was. That the man she was breaking herself to please would never truly see her. Not because she wasn't enough, but because he was too small to recognize greatness in someone else. That morning, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't spend another day apologizing for surviving. Because surviving Richard, surviving Elaine, surviving the betrayal, and the years of emotional erosion, that wasn't weakness. That was strength disguised as endurance. And now that endurance had become transformation, around town, people had started treating me differently, not with pity, I wouldn't have accepted that, but with something else. Respect. Mrs. Bennet, Miss Martha, sweet Miss M, the lady who stood up, the one who didn't back down. I'd become a quiet sort of legend in Shelbyville. At the post office, folks would smile at me like they knew something. At church, I was invited to speak during Women's Day. Me, the woman who used to sit in the back pew and leave early just to avoid small talk. I stood at that podium with my hands shaking, looked out at that sea of familiar faces and said, "Ladies, I used to think the best thing I could do in this life was be small, be sweet, be quiet. I thought that if I kept the peace, I'd be loved. But I was wrong. Because peace doesn't come from keeping silent. It comes from standing tall, from drawing a line and saying, 'This is who I am, and I will not be erased.'" There were tears in the crowd. I saw them. I felt them. And I knew I wasn't just speaking for me anymore. I was speaking for every woman in that room who had been told to sit down, shut up, or stay. And afterward, one by one, they came up to me. "You said exactly what I needed to hear. I thought I was alone. I'm going home today, and I'm going to start living again." That's when I realized something bigger than revenge or even healing had begun. I'd become a mirror, a reflection that showed other women what was possible when you stop shrinking. It didn't mean I forgot what had happened. No. There were still moments when I'd walk past the old photograph of me and Richard on our wedding day and feel a sting. Not because I missed him, but because I mourned the woman in that picture who didn't yet know what was coming. But mourning isn't the same as regret. I don't regret my life. I regret letting parts of myself go for so long. But even that taught me something. How to come back. How to rebuild. How to forgive myself for not knowing better. And love myself for finally learning. One night, while organizing some old boxes, I found a journal I used to keep. I'd tucked it away in the back of a drawer, forgotten behind layers of kitchen towels and receipts. It was filled with entries written late at night, when I couldn't sleep, when I was too afraid to speak out loud. Page after page, I read the voice of a woman who had begged for softness, who longed to be seen, who didn't yet know she would one day find the courage to walk away. I held that journal close to my chest. Then I placed it on the bookshelf in my reading room. Not hidden, not erased, a part of me, a chapter I survived. Later that week, Judith invited me to a women's retreat upstate. 3 days, just us, she said. No chores, no husbands, no guilt, just music, hiking, and campfire stories. I almost said no. Old habits. But instead, I smiled and said, "Count me in." Because I wasn't the woman who said no to life anymore. I was the woman who said yes to late nights and early mornings, to friendships and fresh starts, to quiet moments and loud laughter. Yes to living. There's something about reclaiming your life in your 70s that makes every simple joy feel like a rebellion. That women's retreat Judith invited me to, it changed something in me. Not in a loud movie scene kind of way, but in a quiet, steady sort of unfolding, like a flower that had waited decades to bloom. Just a few hours outside Shelbyville, nestled in the Smoky Mountains, we stayed in little wooden cabins surrounded by trees and the scent of pine needles and campfire smoke. There were 13 of us, all women, all over 60, all carrying stories that would break your heart and piece it back together in the same breath. We cooked together. danced barefoot on grass still wet with morning dew, sang old country songs under the stars. Some of us cried during those fireside talks. Others just listened, nodding with eyes that had seen too much and yet somehow stayed kind. I remember sitting next to a woman named Margie. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, raised 5 kids alone after her husband left, and had only now, at 72, learned to say no without guilt. "I thought I was too old to begin again," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "But now I think maybe I was just too tired to believe in myself." I looked at her and said, "You're not too old. You're right on time." And I meant it, because that's what I was learning. Healing doesn't have an expiration date. You don't run out of time to choose yourself. Every sunrise is a reset button, no matter how many wrinkles you carry or how many years someone tried to convince you that you weren't enough. On the last night of the retreat, we each shared something we wanted to leave behind. Some said fear. Some said shame. Some said old loves that never really loved them back. When it was my turn, I stood, up slowly, knees cracking like dry twigs, and said, "I want to leave behind the idea that silence is safer than truth." The group got quiet, and then, one by one, they started clapping. Not loud, just soft, steady, knowing. That applause wrapped around me like a blanket. Not for something I'd accomplished, but for something I'd finally released. When I got back home, the air in Shelbyville felt different. Or maybe I was different. Richard had moved out by then. Quietly, without drama. He left behind boxes of junk in the garage and a few worn shirts in the closet. I threw most of it away, donated some, burned the rest in a backyard fire pit on a cool October night while listening to Patsy Cline. I didn't cry. I just watched the smoke rise and thought, this is what freedom smells like, a mix of smoke, cedarwood, and closure. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from Elaine, handwritten, 5 pages long. She apologized, over and over again. She said she was in therapy now. Said she was broken when it happened. Said she thought what they had was love. But now she understood it was manipulation. Said she missed our childhood. Said she missed me. I read it once. Folded it neatly. Placed it in a drawer. Not because I forgave her. Not because I wanted her back in my life. But because I didn't need to burn it to feel strong. That was the difference now. I didn't need to destroy people to feel whole. I just needed to choose myself. Day after day, breath after breath, and I was doing it. In little ways, I started taking piano lessons. Just simple stuff, hymns and lullabies. My fingers were stiff, but I didn't care. Every note I played was a reminder that it's never too late to do something, just because it brings you joy. I hosted dinners, too. Big Sunday dinners with homemade chicken pot pie and buttermilk biscuits and fresh blackberry cobbler. The table was full, not with family bound by blood, but with women I'd chosen, and who had chosen me. We laughed loud, told stories that bounced off the walls and echoed through the house like old gospel music. And sometimes, in the quiet after everyone left, I'd sit alone with a cup of tea and just smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally safe inside myself. There were still days the past came knocking. A photo falling out of a drawer. A song on the radio that reminded me of the girl I used to be, the one who waited too long for someone to see her. But when those moments came, I didn't run from them. I sat with them, held them gently like old letters, and then let them go. Because that's what healing is. Not forgetting, not erasing, but choosing peace over pain. Every single time. When I was a little girl, I used to sit on the front porch of my grandmother's house, swinging my legs and listening to her hum old hymns as she sewed. She had these soft hands and a voice that could calm a thunderstorm. One day, I asked her why she never raised her voice even when Grandpa got angry. She smiled at me, not sad, just tired, and said, "Sometimes, baby, a woman's power ain't in how loud she speaks. It's in what she survives." I didn't understand it back then. But now I carry those words like armor, because I know what it means to survive in silence. I know how heavy it is to carry someone else's comfort while neglecting your own. And I know the quiet kind of power that rises when you stop waiting for someone to save you and start saving yourself. That power, it's not loud. It doesn't scream or slam doors. It moves slow, steady, like roots beneath the ground, strong enough to crack concrete. That's what I became. Not a victim, not even a survivor, but a woman who rebuilt her life one quiet choice at a time. It had been nearly a year since the day I found that receipt in Richard's wallet, since I sat on the edge of our bed with my heart falling apart in my hands, since I stared down the truth and chose to live anyway. And now I was living in a way I never had before. Free. One Sunday morning, I was asked to speak at a local women's breakfast hosted by the church. I almost said no. Old habits, old fears. But then I thought about that little girl on the porch, the one who watched women fold themselves into silence. She needed to see this. So I went. I wore my favorite floral dress, the one with the big pink peonies that Richard used to say made me look like a couch. I wore it with pride. And when I stood behind that microphone, I didn't tremble. I looked out at that sea of faces, young, old, tired, brave, and said, "There was a time when I believed I was only as valuable as the love I received. That if someone didn't choose me, it meant I wasn't worth choosing. But I've learned something. The most important person who needs to choose you is you." The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. And then someone clapped. Then another. And then the whole room. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I felt full. Full of something I hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Afterward, women came up to me one by one. Some hugged me. Some just touched my arm. One whispered in my ear, "I left him last month. You helped me believe I could." I held her hand tight and said, "You can. You already did." That day, I went home and sat on the porch again. It was late spring, the kind of warm Tennessee evening where the air smells like jasmine and cut grass. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the hills. I closed my eyes and listened, and I heard it. The sound of my own breath, steady, certain, alive. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't quite put into words until then. I wasn't just healing from what had been done to me. I was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. Not because of Richard, not despite Elaine, but because somewhere, buried beneath the weight of all those quiet years, there had always been a spark, a voice, a self. And now that self was shining, brighter than ever. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure from the people who hurt me. I needed me. And now I had her, the real me, the one who writes her own stories, the one who laughs loudly with friends on Sunday nights, the one who tends to her garden like it's sacred, the one who wakes up every morning and thanks God, not because life is perfect, but because she finally knows her own worth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Fully. Finally. And it wasn't too late. It was right on time. It's a funny thing, the way life circles back. One afternoon in early June, I received a phone call I never expected, from Richard. I saw his name flash on the screen and froze. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed, like I was still the woman who flinched when he cleared his throat. But then I looked around, saw my sunlit kitchen, my lavender plants blooming by the window, the half-finished puzzle on my dining table, and I remembered I wasn't that woman anymore. I answered with a calm, steady voice. "Hello?" "Martha," he said, pausing like he didn't know what words were safe anymore. I just wanted to check on you." I almost laughed. Check on me? But I didn't. I let the silence speak for me. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything." I stayed quiet. He continued. "I messed up. I know that now. You didn't deserve any of it." There it was. The apology I used to pray for at night, crying into my pillow. But now it didn't land the way I once imagined. It didn't feel like a victory or a balm. It just felt late. I said, "I know I didn't deserve it, Richard, but I survived it anyway." Silence again. Then a softer voice. "I've been going to counseling, alone, trying to make sense of things." "That's good," I said. And I meant it. I didn't want him miserable. I just wanted him gone, from my heart, my mind, my spirit. I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know. And maybe he did. So I replied, "Thank you for saying it. I hope you keep going. For your sake." Then I hung up, and I exhaled. Not just a little breath. A deep, full-body release. Like I'd been holding my lungs in for years, waiting for someone else to tell me I could let go. But here's what I'd finally learned. I didn't need permission to be free. That evening, I walked to my garden. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in soft purples and golds. The air smelled like rosemary, and the tomatoes were starting to ripen on the vine. I crouched down, ran my fingers through the dirt, and smiled. I'd built this life. With my own hands. With my own healing. And no one, not Richard, not Elaine, not anyone, could take that from me now. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a storytelling event in Nashville. Women from all over the state were gathering to share their real stories. Not the polished kind, but the raw, messy, powerful kind that come from survival. I almost said no again. That old voice still lingered sometimes, the one that asked, "Who would want to hear what you've been through?" But I didn't listen to it. I said yes. When I walked onto that stage, the lights were warm and bright. The room was full of women, some young, some gray-haired, some with babies on their laps, some holding hands with their daughters. I took a deep breath, and I spoke. Not from pain, not from anger, but from strength. I told them everything. About the receipt, the betrayal, the lies, the silence, and then the awakening. The lavender, the piano lessons, the porch mornings, the peace. When I finished, the room didn't erupt into applause. It rose. Women stood one by one, like they were standing for themselves too. And in that moment, I knew something with all the certainty in the world. This story, my story, was never just about heartbreak. It was about rebirth. About the moment a woman decides that her story isn't over. No matter her age, her scars, or how long she's been told to keep quiet. After the event, a young woman came up to me, no more than 25. She had tears in her eyes. She said, "I want to be like you when I'm old." I smiled and replied, "Then start now, sweetheart. Don't wait 50 years to choose yourself." That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't think about Richard, or Elaine, or all the years that had slipped by. I thought about tomorrow, and the next morning after that, and the fact that no matter how late you bloom, you still bloom. Because the truth is, life doesn't end after betrayal. It begins. When you finally realize that the life you wanted someone else to give you was always yours to create. If you had told me, just a few years ago, that I'd be sitting here, at 78 years old, living alone, smiling, drinking my morning coffee in peace, I might have laughed at you. Or maybe I would have cried. Because for so long, I thought that part of life was over for me. I thought peace was for other people. Joy was for other women. I thought healing was something I'd simply missed my chance at. Like a bus I didn't catch. And now I'd have to walk the rest of the way in silence. But I was wrong. And I want you to hear this. From one heart to another. You're never too old. You're never too far gone. And it's never too late. I lived in a cage for decades, built not just by the man I married, but by the belief that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant staying quiet, that being loyal meant tolerating betrayal, that family couldn't be questioned, no matter how deep the knife they left in your back. But I've learned that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I forgave Richard, not for his sake, but for mine. Because carrying that weight didn't punish him. It punished me. I released it like smoke into the sky, and with it went every ounce of guilt I ever carried for staying too long or walking away too late. I forgave Elaine too. Not with hugs or reunions, but in the quiet decision to no longer let her take up space in my story. And most importantly, I forgave myself. For the years I lost. For the things I ignored. For all the times I swallowed my voice just to keep the peace. Now I don't just speak. I sing. At church, in my garden, on my porch. I hum old hymns, and I laugh loud with friends who have become my family by choice. I dance when I feel like it, cook when I feel like it, and rest when I need to, without apology. I've started writing letters again too, not to send, just to express. I write to the woman I used to be, telling her she didn't fail, that she did the best she could with what she knew, that she held on long enough to become someone stronger than she ever imagined. And every now and then, when I'm out walking or sitting in a cafe, a young woman will come up to me. "Excuse me," she'll say, "Are you that woman from the video? The one who told her story?" And I'll nod, gently. And they'll smile, like they've found something they didn't even know they were looking for. Hope. Because that's what stories are, at the end of the day. Not just memories, not just entertainment, but bridges. From one heart to another, from one woman's survival to another's awakening. If you're hearing this now, if something in my story stirred something in you, I want you to know. You don't have to keep living small. You don't have to stay where it hurts just because it's familiar. You don't owe anyone your silence. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to take up space, even if your voice trembles, even if your hands shake, even if you've waited decades to say the words out loud. Say them anyway. Say, "I deserve more." Say, "I'm done surviving. I'm ready to live." Say, "I love the woman I'm becoming, because I do. I love her fiercely. I protect her like I wish someone had protected me. I cherish her laughter. I listen to her when she says no. I honor her when she says yes. And I wake up every morning in this house that's finally mine, in this body that's been through storms and still stands. And I say, I'm proud of you, Martha. That's my name. But maybe, just maybe, it's yours too.